Angelina Jolie. Nice. How much for the seat? So back to the old film car days. My company created film cars in New York City. Not only did film cars, but we were also a press fleet representative for Triumph motorcycles in the United States. And that was an interesting gig. It was a great side gig and nice income for the company. And we got 12 motorcycles, new motorcycles every year of the different types to kind of play and hand out. So our job was to place their vehicles in movie and television shoots and editorial, and we would have the bikes on hand. So clients would call for motorcycles and they'd be like, we want a Harley Davidson, da 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 da. And be like, for half price, I can get you a Triumph. And the reason it was half price is because Triumph would pay us to place it on top of the client paying us to bring it. So we'd actually make 50% more in the long run. So I got a Triumph and I can get it for you. I have it. Let me send you a picture of this. And we placed tons of them. In fact, they had a PR agency in New York City that we were supposed to work with. And the idea originally when we signed on is they would be sending us around. They'd get us 1 or 2 gigs, we'd get 8. And suddenly we were outpacing that PR agency tremendously until they'd finally dump them. So we had Rocket 3s, the big Rocket 3 had just come out, and the Bonneville retro bikes were out, and the Speed Triple naked bike. The great thing about their lineup was that they have one of every type of bike. So you have kind of a cruiser and a retro bike and a sport bike. The 675 Daytona had just come out. So we had everything people could want. And it was great. And sometimes the calls were weird. Like the calls that their agency called us for were sometimes pretty strange. We'd have to get them in the weird places. Like there was a party on a yacht on the west side of Manhattan. And they wanted a Rocket 3, which is a big bike, and a matching, these kind of cool burnt orange and a matching Speed Triple. And we had to crane them over the water on the dock so they could be sitting there for a party of, rich New York elites who probably don't even know what it is or how to ride a motorcycle or even have a driver's license. But there they were. And other ones were like getting them into the windows of like Bergdorf Goodman or Macy's. And these windows have little doors on them about that big, meant for stuffing a mannequin and some clothes in. And we got to move a 700-pound motorcycle through it. Pushing a motorcycle through Bergdorf Goodman or one of these very elite, and the rich people are looking at you like, is this some kind of like performance art that they are pushing motorcycles through here? What do I think about this? And they're considering you as you go through. I'm like, hi, we're all in our Triumph gear. And just stranger and stranger places. One of the most fun ones was getting, I think it was a scrambler. There was a big hoity-toity party up near NYU. And it was this new building they had just finished. And it was glass and gorgeous and tall. And I think each of the apartments was millions, absolutely millions. And this one was an apartment that was the entire floor. And they had given each room to a different designer to design the room, like real designers, like Prada and Gucci did this room. And we weren't allowed in there without little booties over our shoes. So we couldn't touch anything because everything was worth $1 million. And we had to bring this scrambler up the servants' elevator. And they didn't have like a big service elevator for like pushing carts through. It was like a 2-person elevator. We had to get the motorcycle in. And the poor guy he was required for union rules or something. He had to operate the elevator. Like we could easily push the button, but this poor guy's crammed in there. We got a motorcycle stuffed up and the 2 of us are in it and there's a wheel in our face and the door barely closing. We're pulling the wheel in and it's leaking fuel. I thought we were going to die. Like it was one of the situations that elevator got stuck, we'd be dead. But we got up there and then we had to build a track through this apartment. And one of the floors was like animal hide, the whole thing, instead of a carpet. They had figured a way of stitching together cow hides or whatever it was with hair. It was gorgeous and kind of creepy, but we had to figure a way of getting this motorcycle without touching it. We weren't allowed to touch the floor. So we got it there, and it was one of those parties where like Derek Jeter was there and all these people, and my partner got to hang out and protect it and hang out with everybody. And when we had to get it out, and getting it out, they could care less. After the party, I think this party just ruined this place. And then it sold for like $15 million. We'd also give these things to journalists. Some of the journalists were competent motorcycle riders who they would show up and they had their own helmet and gear and you'd have a quick chat, you'd run them through the bike and off they'd go. And some were not. Or they would play like they were, I've ridden plenty of things, and you realize they get on it and they're like, where's the gas pedal? Like, oh, we're in trouble. And we had one guy from Men's Health, and he was the editor. Like, he was one of the bigger guys there. And he's like, oh yeah, I'm going to come take it. And he came up and he's like, yeah, you have some gloves? I'm like, sure, I have some gloves. You have any, you have a helmet? Like, I guess you could use my helmet. Like, there you go. He's like, wow, you got any jackets? And like, you don't ride motorcycles. And he's like, oh yeah, all the time. I've got motorcycles. I'm like, okay. And he lives in a brownstone in Brooklyn, so there's nowhere to park one, essentially. And I'm like, where are you going to park it? Because we want to make sure that it's safe. Oh, right in front of my brownstone. It'll be fine. Like, okay. Because there's usually the brownstones have these little gated entrances to them at the lower level. He's, I'll park it in there. It won't be on the street. It was almost a hobby in New York to knock over parked motorcycles. Like, you would just back into them and pull away. So you'd see them littered everywhere on their side. And I made it a small hobby of mine to go pick them up. Like, I'd see tipped over motorcycles until I realized if I was caught picking it up, somebody would maybe think I was doing something to it. So I stopped that. And he calls me up. He's all like, I need you to come pick the bike up. I'm like, oh, what's wrong? He's like, well, I broke the clutch handle. I'm like, you broke it? Which means you dropped it. I mean, it's not really, you dropped it. I go, how'd you do? Is it okay? Are you okay? Did you crash? He's like, oh, I just pulled it and broke it off. I'm like, you did. Your massive strength just cracked that thing off. And that was the story he was sticking with. I'm like, that's a bunch of crap. You know that. Like, no, I just snapped it off. Oh, you also bent the shift lever down there. Did you break that off with your super strong toes too? He's like, oh, it's fine. That's fine. I'm like, and we brought it back. And I thought that would be the end of that. But he came back again after having been let go from Men's Fitness or whatever the magazine was to do it for another magazine. And he stands us up. He's supposed to meet us. And getting anywhere in New York takes time and effort, even with a taxi or even on the subway or walking. It's always a combination of those. I sent my guys out to the garage and where are you? And he just disappeared. And then I get a phone call and he's like, oh man, I'm so sorry. So sorry, man. I'm really sorry. I'm like, okay, that's fine. No skin off my back. And he's like, I want to do something for you. I'm like, sure. So one of the women from the magazine he was working at calls me and they send us an invitation to Madison 11. Anyway, it's one of the shishi restaurants that apparently the publishing group has a account with. And this has nothing to do with cars or motorcycles, but I got to tell you, we went to dinner there and it was one of those places where you're not sure what fork you're supposed to pick up. And I've been to fancy places, but this was nuts. And the manager came out, the head chef came out to talk to us. We had our own sommelier. And he's like, would you like the Chant? And I'm like, absolutely, 2 bottles of Chant, please. And at the end, it was like 3 desserts. And then they gave us a gift basket at the end. And I'm like, are we supposed to tip you? Like, I actually had asked that. I'm not familiar with this kind of free eating at $1 million restaurants. He's like, oh, no, sir. All been taken care of. Did you get your gift basket? Yes, I did. Only one. Oh, we'll get you another one. 2 gift baskets with like chocolates and desserts and all this. And I'm like, that was totally worth being stood up at a garage. 100%. But you, again, never knew what was going to go on with these bikes. We did get a really good placement. Of course, we worked with films, and we did get a placement with the production of Salt. And that was the Angelina Jolie movie where she was kind of be like a super James Bond spy kind of thing. They were shooting in New York. They had 6 street triples, identical ones. And they did like 2 hero bikes, 2 bikes they could do stunts with, and 2 that could probably get wrecked. And Triumph sent them up, and we rigged them up, and we took them to set. And that was when I ran into a couple of the union guys that we had met a few years earlier. I don't know if I ever told that story about the union guys who talked to us about what we were doing and how perhaps they need a piece of the action. I'll tell that story another time. They happened to be there and they're like, what you doing here? Because we had promised that we just did small shoots and we were small, we're not one of the big companies. And they're like, how'd you transport it? Did you use Union Transport? And we're like, we just brought them in our truck. We're just dropping them off. This is a one-time only deal. Like, we'll keep an eye on them for you. We'll take care of the bikes. We'll make sure they're okay. And I'm like, I don't know how to read that. Are they going to end up at the bottom of the East River? Like, what's happening? They're like, we'll talk to you when you're done with this. Because every company in New York eventually talks to somebody like that. I'm not going to say the mob, but somebody like that. And I'm like, yes, we drop off the bikes, and we didn't have anything to do with the stunt work, thankfully. And they took them upstate New York and did a bunch of stuff. So the motorcycle you saw in the movies were our bikes. But the funny part was, we went to pick them up, didn't see the guys again. We picked them up, brought them back to the garage, putting them in the garage, we were moving stuff around, and there were always characters in the neighborhood. Like, it's Brooklyn, it's the neighborhood. And we had a few local guys who'd always be walking by and saying hello. And one of the guys walks by and he's like, we had already shipped off, the two of the bikes I think did get wrecked. We got rid of two. So there was like 2 or 3 bikes left. I'm cleaning them up and prepping them to get shipped out. And this guy's like, what are those? I'm like, these motorcycles we used in a movie. Oh yeah, what movie? It's called Salt with Angelina Jolie. Angelina Jolie? Really? I'm like, yeah. Angelina Jolie sat on this motorcycle. I'm like, absolutely. He walks over and sniffs the seat. Then he's all like, Angelina Jolie. Nice. How much for the seat? And I'm like, what? He's all, how much for the seat? I'm like, I don't know, $500? Opens his wallet and goes, foom, 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 foom. Okay, Angelina Jolie takes just a seat off of a motorcycle, walks away with it. Never hear about it again. I don't know where it ended up, what the guy was doing with it, but that happened. And so I was like, we lost one of the seats. We need a replacement seat. Let's put a seat on it. And those are the kind of things you can run into in a press fleet.
If you get a speeding ticket or other traffic citation, don't just pay it. It can involve costly insurance premium increases, points on your license, possible suspensions, and a lot of other inconveniences. And when you fight it, you want the right people on your side. That means finding a local lawyer to wherever you got the ticket. Even if it's in your backyard or on a road trip or wherever, off the record is the best way to find the best attorney. They pair you with a local attorney wherever you get the ticket to fight for you and achieve the best outcome. In most cases, you won't even have to appear. So be sure to check them out at the link in the description below and download their free app. You just take a picture of your ticket and they handle the rest. So be sure to check them out and thank them for their support of VINwiki.